I, Chloe, 29F, had always trusted Mark. He had been my high school sweetheart, my partner in life, my confidant. Our relationship seemed flawless at first, filled with late-night talks, laughter, and an unspoken understanding that we were building something for the long haul. When we got married, I thought it was the ultimate affirmation that we had everything figured out. But that illusion, as it turns out, was just that, an illusion. It started out small. A conversation here, a phone call there, snippets of words I couldn't quite understand. Mark would often slip into his native tongue when speaking to his sister, Rachel. It was something I never thought too much of. After all, it was their language, and it didn't bother me. It was just their way of communicating, a piece of their world that I didn't know much about. But there was a quiet part of me that was always curious. For years, I'd heard bits and pieces of their conversations, and I couldn't help but wonder what they were saying. What was it about me that they couldn't talk about in front of me? I'd tried learning the language before. I took lessons, studied online, practiced. But Mark always brushed it off. "You don't need to know," he would say with a half smile, dismissing my attempts. "It's just a family thing." I told myself it was fine, his world didn't need to be my world. He was mine in other ways. In ways that mattered. But when that fateful night arrived, everything changed. Mark had been acting strange all evening. He was restless, distracted, his usual light-hearted demeanor replaced by something darker. I didn't think too much of it at first. I was used to him working late, handling the stress of his job. But as I sat in the kitchen, flipping through some old magazines, I overheard him talking to Rachel on the phone. It wasn't the usual banter I'd grown accustomed to. No, this time, there was an edge to his voice, a calculated, almost rehearsed quality. I immediately stopped what I was doing, straining to listen. "Don't worry, Rachel. I've got it all under control. Chloe thinks everything is fine." "She's too trusting," Mark said, his voice low, a hint of mockery behind the words. "She'll never know the truth." The words hit me like a slap to the face. The blood drained from my head, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled, my stomach twisted into knots. "I'm using her, Rachel. She's paying off all my debts. But when I'm done with her, I'm leaving. I'm going back to our hometown, and I'll marry Marissa." The words repeated in my head, over and over. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind was racing. Was this some kind of joke? Was it a misunderstanding? I had to force myself to stay still. To hear it all. My whole world was suddenly shaking, collapsing around me. My husband, the man I loved, the man I had supported through thick and thin, was planning to leave me. And it was all a game. I hadn't known the full extent of what he had been doing behind my back. I had no idea he was drowning in debts, using me as his financial safety net. All those nights he told me not to worry, that everything was fine, it was all a lie. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. The anger was bubbling up inside me, but I forced it down. I had to be smart. I had to think clearly. I wasn't just going to sit back and let this happen. For the next few days, everything felt like a blur. Mark was his usual self, distracted, more preoccupied with his business, constantly checking his phone, disappearing for hours. He never once suspected that I had overheard him, that I knew what he had been saying to his sister. I could hardly look at him without feeling a deep, gnawing anger twist in my gut. I spent those days planning. I couldn't confront him just yet, not without more evidence, not without making sure that I had everything in place. This wasn't just about anger, it was about survival. I had to figure out what he had been hiding, and I had to do it without him suspecting anything. I started by digging into his financial records. Over the years, I had trusted him completely. I had never asked too many questions about his finances. We had a joint account for household expenses, but he was always the one who handled the bigger investments, the bigger debts. It had never occurred to me to check up on him, not until now. But now, everything felt different. Now, I had to know the truth. It wasn't hard to find the discrepancies once I started looking. There were large sums of money missing, loans he had taken out in secret, payments to unknown sources, credit card bills that didn't add up. Everything was a mess. But what caught my attention the most was a series of payments to a bank account in his hometown, payments that lined up with the time he had been spending there. I didn't need to know much to understand what was happening. I was starting to piece everything together. I wasn't sure if he had already spent all the money he owed or if he was still borrowing. But I was starting to see the full picture. Mark had been living a double life, and I had been none the wiser. The most frustrating part was that he had made me believe in him, made me believe in our marriage, in our future. He had used my love as collateral in his selfish plans. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I had to act fast before he could destroy everything I had worked for. I needed more information, proof that he was planning to leave me for Marissa. That was the final piece of the puzzle, the one thing I still needed. I had everything in place by the time Mark came home that night. He seemed more distracted than usual, but I wasn't going to let him know that I was onto him. I had planned for this moment for days, and now, it was time to confront him. "Mark, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He looked up, startled. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but there was a nervous edge to his tone. I didn't waste time. "I know everything," I said calmly, my gaze unwavering. "I know about the debts, about the money you've been taking from me, and about your plans to leave me for Marissa." His face shifted. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes that was pure panic, something he couldn't hide. He stammered, trying to gather himself. "Chloe, you don't understand," I cut him off. "No, I understand perfectly. I understand that I've been paying off your mistakes while you plan to walk away with someone else. You think you can use me, and then toss me aside when you're done. But you're wrong. You're not leaving me like this." His words faltered. "Chloe, please. It's not like that. I never meant to hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "You never meant to hurt me? That's the line you're going with?" My voice rose, the anger that had been building inside me finally breaking free. "You've been lying to me for years. You've been using me, Mark. I gave you everything, my love, my support, and my trust, and you've been plotting behind my back the entire time." Mark took a step back, his face pale. He looked like he might be sick. "Please," he said again, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'll fix this, I'll do whatever it takes. I made a mistake. I didn't mean for it to get this far." But I wasn't interested in his apologies anymore. The person I had married was gone, replaced by a stranger I no longer recognized. He had chosen his path, and I was done being part of his game. "I'm not fixing anything for you, Mark. You've made your bed, and now you'll lie in it," I said coldly. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm done." I could see the realization settle over him, the devastation. But it didn't matter. The damage had been done, and nothing he said could undo the betrayal I had felt. Mark had left the house just days after our confrontation. He took a few clothes, some personal items, and walked out the door without a second glance. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a strange sense of relief. The house felt quieter, the weight on my shoulders lighter. I wasn't sure what to expect from that point forward, but I knew one thing: I was never going back to the woman who had allowed herself to be manipulated. The first few weeks were full of tension, confusion, and an overwhelming mix of emotions. I wasn't entirely sure what I was supposed to feel: sadness, anger, betrayal, or something else entirely. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going to allow Mark to walk away unscathed. Not after everything he'd put me through. As the weeks went on, I kept my distance. Mark didn't contact me much, except for a few desperate calls here and there, begging me to reconsider. He promised that he would get his finances together and fix everything. But I wasn't going to be his safety net anymore. I had already seen the damage he had caused. I wasn't interested in saving him. Meanwhile, Mark's world began to unravel quickly. Without my financial assistance, his situation took a drastic turn for the worse. The debts he had accumulated over the years, debts I had unknowingly helped him pay off, were now suffocating him. He had always kept me in the dark about the true extent of his financial troubles. And now, with me no longer there to cover for him, the reality hit him hard. The people he owed money to, people who had been patient when I was there to smooth things over, weren't as forgiving without me. Mark's phone calls went unanswered. Debt collectors came knocking at his door. I heard rumors that there were men showing up at his apartment, demanding payments that he couldn't make. I couldn't help but feel a pang of satisfaction in my chest as I watched the slow but inevitable destruction of his life. He had been reckless with his choices, and now he was paying the price. It wasn't revenge, it was just the inevitable consequence of his own actions. I had warned him, tried to save him from himself, but he never listened. Now, he was alone, drowning in his own mess. Then came the divorce proceedings. The divorce process was more complicated than I had anticipated. There was the matter of dividing assets, the house, and the fact that we had a prenup that Mark had insisted on signing. At the time, he'd made it clear that he wasn't worried about anything like that. He had been so confident that everything would go according to plan, so certain that I would never leave him. He had assured me that our love was enough to carry us through any hardship. But as I stood in the lawyer's office, staring at the paperwork in front of me, I couldn't help but think of how naive I had been. Mark had been playing a game, one that I hadn't fully understood until now. He had manipulated me into believing that he was the victim, that we were partners in every sense. But the truth was, he had been using me, using my love, my hard work, my support, to cover up his mistakes. He had never truly been the man I thought he was. The prenup had been something he insisted upon early in our relationship. He had told me it was just a precaution, that it wasn't anything personal. At the time, I had agreed. After all, we were young, and I trusted him. I didn't see any need to argue over it. But now, as I looked at the agreement in black and white, it felt like an unbreakable shield protecting me from any of Mark's future claims. Mark had always been the one to push for the prenup, the one who insisted on making sure he was financially secure if anything ever went wrong. He'd convinced me it was a good idea, a simple formality. At the time, I didn't realize that the very thing he had pushed for would be his downfall. As the divorce proceedings began, Mark attempted to argue for a share of the house, the assets, and even the money I had earned while we were married. But when the lawyers went over the terms of the prenup, it became clear that he had no case. According to the agreement, any infidelity would void his right to claim anything from me. It didn't matter what he had invested in the business or what debts he had accumulated, it all came down to the fact that he had cheated on me. I had the proof, evidence of his affair with the nanny, the late-night texts, the phone calls, the receipts. Everything was there, clear as day. I had gathered it all during our marriage, just in case I ever needed it. Now, it was my trump card. Mark tried to fight it. He tried to argue that his affair wasn't the reason our marriage fell apart, that it was my fault for not being supportive enough. But none of that mattered. The prenup was ironclad, and there was no way around it. He couldn't cheat and expect to walk away with anything. As the months went by, Mark's life continued to spiral. Without my support, without the financial cushion I had provided for so long, he fell deeper into debt. His business, the dream that he had been so obsessed with, crumbled. He had no clients, no investors, no way of recovering. The people he had promised to pay now had no patience left. The phone calls kept coming. But now, they weren't for me. They were for him. His attempts to rebuild his life were futile. The very thing he had been counting on, the trust one had put in him, the financial backing I had provided, was now gone. Mark tried to reach out to me a few times, claiming that he was getting his act together. But I had moved on. I wasn't interested in being his savior anymore. His relationship with Marissa, the woman he had been planning to leave me for, never materialized. She quickly saw him for what he was, a man who had no future, no stability, and no real direction. Without my money, he couldn't even impress her with the lifestyle he had promised. In the end, she left him, just as I had. It didn't take long for Mark to hit rock bottom. He couldn't afford to keep the apartment. He couldn't afford anything. His creditors were relentless, and the stress of it all took a toll on him. The man who had once stood tall, full of ambition and confidence, was now a shadow of himself. I watched from a distance, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. Mark had used me, manipulated me, and thought he could get away with it. But now, he was alone, with nothing to show for his actions. His debts were his own. His dreams had crumbled. And I was finally free.